We'll talk about that.
It's quite poor. Hello and welcome, my name is Ian and this channel is all about music and art, and in this series of videos we've been looking at what is happening regarding the music streaming in the UK. The UK Government's Digital Culture, Media and Sports Committee have been looking into the ways that streaming platforms and large record companies manage payments to songwriters, musicians and performers. And on the 15th of October 2020, Parliament published a news article stating that the Digital Culture, Media and Sports Committee were going to inquire into the impact of the streaming on the future of the music industry. This article stated that the inquiry would consider whether the government should take action to protect the industry from piracy in the wake of steps taken by the EU on copyright and intellectual property rights. Now, I knew that some high-profile musicians and music industry types were going to be giving evidence to the committee. And the first of these meetings was on the 24th of November 2020. And it continued through December into January and February of this year, 2021. Now, these were long meetings lasting over 3 hours. So what I've done is I've edited them all down into shorter videos, and you can find a link to all the previous meeting videos in the description down below. I've also created an introduction for each section, and if you want to, you can skip straight past those bits to the questions by clicking on the timestamps. Again, all of this stuff is in the description. So in this video we'll have a look at the first session from the 10th of February 2021, and I thought it would be worth providing a short background to the witnesses giving evidence in this first session. We have Roberto Neri, who is the chair of the Music Publishers Association, and Geoff Taylor, chief executive of the BPI. Roberto Neri was Executive Vice President for the UK of Downtown Music Publishing and also headed the European business development of its parent company, Downtown Music Holdings. He took up his position at the Music Publishing Association on the 3rd of July 2019. Geoff Taylor is Chief Executive of the BPI, the representative body for the UK record labels, and for the Brits Award Limited, which stages the annual Brits Awards. He joined the BPI as its chief executive in February 2007. All sessions were chaired by Julia Knight, and the complete list of committee members and relevant links are in the description down below. This recording is made in agreement with the UK Parliament's terms and conditions, which state that I cannot alter the video or audio in any way. I can't use the material for satire or use it on a website or social media platform that promotes, encourages and facilitates illegal activity or encourage hatred and antisocial behaviour. So here is part 2 of session 1 from the 10th of February 2021 into the economics of music streaming. Thank you. Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Geoff and Roberto. Roberto, if I could start with you first. Just following up on what Damien Green was asking about. I mean, it is striking the difference in your evidence as the Music Publishers Association and the evidence from the Independent Music Publishers Forum, in that you've just made it clear to the committee you're reasonably happy with the state of affairs, and the Independent Music Publishers Forum has called the split from streaming in the evidence they sent in a gross disparity and inequality, and another phrase they used, they said it was scandalous. Why is there such a difference between the MPA's views on this and the views of the Independent Music Publishers Forum?
Thank you, Mr. Brennan. We represent a broad church of independents to large international publishers, from sole traders all the way through to the biggest companies that exist. And the common consensus on our board is that we're moving in the right direction. Clearly we'd like more, as we've suggested, but we were at a dynamic of 10 to 1 at one point. We're now down to, going by the figures that's been suggested today, at 3 to 4 to 1. So just by that alone, we are moving in the right direction, and the submission that we've supplied is really to fight for the things that we're asking for, and that is to combat piracy. Piracy now hasn't been fixed through streaming. streaming's obviously made it. The market was so down from 2002 for 15
We're
years.
going to get onto piracy, and I don't want to take away from other people who are going to ask questions about that.
Sure.
But what I wanted to know was, I mean, you as you described, obviously you represent the big publishers who also are part of the same corporations as the big labels, and you also represent smaller publishers. Do your smaller publishing members agree with the Independent Music Publishers Forum that the current split is a scandal? Or do they agree with the view that you've outlined to the committee?
I have to honestly say I've never heard it being referred to as a scandal. Clearly, I hear different points of views, and we all want more,
Okay.
and we are moving in the right direction. I mean, I've not heard anything as concrete as what you've just said to me.
It's in the evidence that was submitted to the committee, so I'm just quoting from the written evidence that they submitted. I mean, is it unfair, the charge that's put, that the fact that these days the majors own most of publishing as well as the most of the recordings and record labels, that unduly influences the views that are put forward on publishing and suppresses the value of it's their job, as Joni Mitchell put it, to stoke the star maker machinery behind the popular song. The popular song itself, is its value being suppressed by the fact that those who are stoking the star maker machinery, i.e. the record labels, also own the publishing?
Obviously, I'm not party to the record labels' commercial arrangements. I haven't encountered or seen anything. I've heard conspiracy theories in the 20 years of myself being in the business. But, you know, the major publishing companies are helping to push the rates up in the forums, the other forums I sit in on different boards. And in music publishing, we're fortunate to represent loads of, up to the company I actually work for, we collect up to 20,000 different source types. So, you know, music streaming is one element. I can only say in the forums I'm sitting with these major companies in, they're absolutely helping songwriters collect better rates from other sources of income when I'm at the table with them. So
Okay.
I can't speak for the major labels with their digital deals.
Okay, Rupert, that's fair enough. Can I just ask you one other question? I asked Geoff a few questions, and that is, what do you make of all the activity that's going on at the moment with companies like Hypnosis and Mercuriadis and others buying up, future income streams of songs? What's the view of you as head of the Music Publishers Association on that? Roberto, did you hear my question?
Oh, sorry. I thought that was to Geoff. Apologies.
No, sorry.
My voice...
What's your view? Did you hear the question?
So I had the question with regards to Hypnosis acquiring copyrights.
Yeah. What's your view about that, and what that means for the business, and what the implications are for publishing?
I think it demonstrates the long-term value of song copyrights, to be honest. And it equally enables songwriters to choose what they wish to do with those with their songs. It's always been a competitive marketplace. Acquisitions of copyrights have taken place prior to Hypnosis. Clearly, you're seeing some big headlines at the moment because people are recognizing, particularly through this COVID era we're in, that the value of songwriting and music publishing is very strong and will sustain growth over a long period of time.
Okay, thanks, Roberto. Geoff, as you know, over many, many years, I've argued very strongly in favor of intellectual property and in policy changes to ensure that the music industry can protect its copyright and combat piracy and so on. But is it fair to say that as the Chief Executive of BPI, your role here is really to represent the interests of the majors in lobbying Parliament and government?
Absolutely not. The BPI, we have 450 members, most of whom are independent music companies of all shapes and sizes, frontline labels, catalogue labels, classical labels, etc., jazz labels, every genre and every business model. And we engage very, very closely with them We listen to their views. They have 50% of the seats on our board, 50% of the votes around our table, and they're treasured by us. And we run a lot of programs specifically for the indies, like the Music Export Growth Scheme, which raises grants for indies. The Mercury Prize is very important for the independent community that we took over some years ago. And we do an awful lot of training and other services specifically for the indies. So no, not in any way. We try to promote the interests of the recorded music sector as a whole, which includes the independents and the majors and the artists.
So there was a story when the major UK heads of the majors appeared before us that lobbyists had been employed to coach them before they appeared before the committee. That wasn't something that BPI was engaged in, was it? Or did you employ any lobbyists for them? Or?
We certainly spoke to the majors, we discussed all the issues that were likely to come up before the committee. And frankly, we wish that on the indies panel that you'd invited some of our indies to give evidence, and we would have done the same with them, because obviously.
Well, in fairness, the majors are getting a go. You're getting a go. AIM got a go. And
that's fair enough.
I think that's fair enough. It's only fair we have both sides of the arguments. Have you engaged any lobbyists yourselves as BPI on this inquiry to try and influence events?
We've got professional advisors who will advise us on media, who will advise us on policy issues. That's kind of not unusual for us.
Is that in relation to this specific inquiry?
We have instructed a firm in relation to this inquiry who are helping us on media and just understanding.
Are you able to tell us who they are?
I think it'd probably be fair to write to you with that. That would be okay.
All right. Okay. Geoff, you know what the general charge is that's levied, and I think it's only fair you get a chance to answer it in front of the committee in the industry. And broadly speaking, it's the charge tends to be that there's a lot of opulence, for major record label executives and industry lawyers and lobbyists and so on, but not sufficient of the income that's generated. And, as I said to you earlier on, I've always been very much in favor of trying to grow the size of that pie by making sure intellectual property rights can be enforced. But, the general charge is that the income generated by music creators doesn't get down, enough of it doesn't get down to the creators itself, the singers, the musicians, songwriters, and so on. Obviously the lack of live, as we said already, has really brought sharply into focus that streaming isn't bringing a lot of money down that ecosystem as far as it could go. That's the charge, the opulence versus austerity. What's your answer to that as a executive within the industry?
Sure, simply that we wouldn't agree with the proposition that not a lot of value is flowing down from streaming. The streaming market is growing, as you know, very robustly year on year. In 2019, for labels and artists, it generated £629 million. That's growing every year. And the number of artists, as I said before, who are benefiting from that is increasing every year. So, of course, to go back to one of the chair's observations at the beginning, you have artists who are critically acclaimed, who are fantastic artists musically and who have a great live following, but for whom streaming income represents only a relatively small proportion of their income. But that's perhaps because for those artists, not every genre is heavily streamed. Not all artists have fans who necessarily engage heavily on streaming services. They might do well through physical sales, they might do well through selling merch, absolutely through selling live. Artists' incomes have always been a mixture of all of these different areas. But streaming is growing really well, and our biggest concern, it has the potential to get us back to the levels that we were at with the height of the CD sales and beyond it potentially, but only if we allow all these positive dynamics of competition and free market and investment in A&R to continue, and that's what we would like to see. Because if I could just finish the thought, we really believe that would be by far the most effective way of increasing artist earnings. Would be rather than to redistribute the existing pot of money in some complicated way, to grow the amount of money coming into the industry and then ensure that it flows through.
You see, the thing is that we can have Mercury-nominated artists who, as you say, are struggling to make their rent, as we've heard, but you're comfortable with the $593 million share bonus for the top 6 executives as a result of the Warner IPO, or the $120 million remuneration package to the top 5 executives at Warner Music Group in 2019, which is actually the entire revenue of the top 27 tracks in 2019. I noticed that in 2017, total directors' emoluments at BPI were only £724,779. Do you ever feel you should have gotten to a more lucrative part of the music industry yourself, Geoff, based on those figures?
Well, perhaps like a lot of people in their jobs in music, I was probably guided by my interests more than how much money I could make and my passion for music. So I'm very motivated doing what I do. In terms of remuneration for executives in the industry, I can't really comment. That's their issue, not really anything to do with the BPI, other than to say these are major global corporations with huge responsibilities and very large companies, and it's really not for me to comment on how they're paid. But what I do want to see is British record companies and record companies generally making a profit, being successful, because that's what leads to growing investment in the next generation of talent.
But why is it just? Well, let me say this though, Geoff. But why is it unfair? Because we are limited on time. Why is it unfair though for artists and songwriters, to complain they aren't getting a few more crumbs from that extremely heavily laden table?
Well, I think the industry's investment is what has driven British music's success over the last 60 years. The fact that we've got such an incredibly successful recorded music industry that's popular all around the globe is because we take more risks on artists. We invest a higher proportion of turnover, 25% in A&R in this country, than in virtually every other country in the world. And that cycle of taking risk on unknown artists and spending heavily on marketing, spending heavily in the recording studios to make the best album possible, etc. That is what has driven the success of British music. And that requires companies and capital to come into the business and to take risks. And that is what we're keen to preserve, because we really believe that ensures that the most artists benefit.
Do your figures on A&R include royalties that are paid to artists?
They include advances, which is, I think, 50-something%, the costs of production, so recording costs, video costs, tour support. That counts for, I think, almost 90% of it.
And just finally, Chair, before I finish, the issues around competition and the industry and the way that it's become very vertically integrated. I mean, we've talked about the fact that the industry did have a big dip in revenues when piracy came on board and digital came through. And we talked about executive rewards. I mean, the idea is that the industry is only about the size it was 20 years ago. The executive pay is not the same as it was 20 years ago, though, is it? How does that stack up?
You're trying to pin me on executive pay. I don't even monitor executive pay. That's really not my principal concern. My principal concern is the growth of the business and how much are we managing to create in terms of revenues from streaming, and how can we invest more of that every year into more British artists.
If the pie's the same size and more of it's going to the top, then obviously that is the issue, isn't it?
I think the issue that has rightly been raised is there are artists who are critically acclaimed, as said, who are not able to earn enough money from streaming to support themselves. We want to see those artists earn more money from streaming. We truly do. We absolutely think some of the artists who've been complaining about it, they're talented artists, and we'd love to see them earn as much money as possible. But you can only do that by increasing the total amount that comes into the streaming economy, which we touched on at the beginning. And we have a series of policy measures that we'd like to put forward that we think could be very effective in achieving that.
Okay, thanks, Geoff. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. I think if the majors did actually spend money on lobbying for the session that they had in front of us, I think they should ask for a refund. Mr. Neri, just want to pick up a couple of points with your questioning with Kevin there. You talked about the acquisition of copyright. Is the phenomenon of the mass acquisition of copyright that we're seeing, is that a symptom effectively of the way in which the economics of music streaming is so distorted and distended? Is this effectively a sort of often a fire sale to make ends meet, because they're not actually making the money for what we would call the traditional means?
From my experience and from what I've heard elsewhere, I've been aware of a couple of particular instances where due to the lack of live at the moment, it's had an impact that has actually helps particular songwriters to consider taking their copyrights to market. I've never heard it being based on streaming. Clearly, there's growth in streaming. The numbers of paid subscribers is going up. We're hoping the issues.
Forgive me if the return is only a pence per stream and 0.05 pence in terms of YouTube, then clearly they're not making the money. Therefore, you're going to have the copyrights commercial product that can be sold in the open market, and that's what's happening. This is an indication. That's what I'm asking you. Is it an indication of the way in which the economics of music streaming is pressing down on the overall position of creatives in the sector?
I think songwriters have recognised that this is available to them as a choice. I don't think it's due to the economics of streaming. There is future value from the person acquiring these rights, because we see the growth coming from new markets recognising copyright, and equally the things we would like to have addressed. Hopefully they happen. YouTube, for example, has 6 times the amount of monthly plays than Spotify, but pays 1/10. So look at the potential value there if the government does address the issues we're asking them to look at. And songwriters have been given the values. Some say they're high at the moment. For me, I just think that's just recognising the value of songwriting.
Mr. Neri, so you don't recognise any relationship at all between songwriters selling their product off, the rights to their product off, their copyright, and the fact that there isn't fair remuneration in the industry?
That doesn't resonate with me.
Right.
No.
Okay. You stated earlier that streaming services are taking double the share of the pie compared to the song, and that without the song, the streaming services wouldn't have anything to play. But the recording is taking almost 4 times what the song is taking. Couldn't you just equally say that the recording effectively is the same critique that you made about streaming services you could make about the recording?
Record companies have always been good partners with publishers and songwriters. Again, this goes way back. The value that record companies enable those songs to be promoted in ways that publishers haven't traditionally operated in. There is a change in the market now where publishers are becoming more involved, and there are DIY services available, helping artists go direct. It's a choice for artists whether they go down the DIY route or whether they sign to the labels. As I say, the ratios change from a 10 to 11 to 1 to what you're referring to as a 4 to 1 is 3 to 4, from my understanding. So I generally believe we are going in the right direction. Would publishers like to collect more on behalf of songwriters? Absolutely, yes. The majority of what we receive, we pay to our songwriters. We're left with a fraction of what we receive. So we do that in the best interest of songwriters.
Steve Bryan.
Thanks, Chair. Hello, chaps. Thanks very much for joining us. I wonder if I could talk to you about Safe Harbour, which I'm interested in. This seems to have created quite a lot of interest around the business, and certainly during this inquiry that we've been holding. So, Geoff, to you first. So BPI argues that there should be no extension to Safe Harbour, the provisions of that to YouTube and other companies. Artists have certainly told us that they're opposed to Safe Harbour. I mean, Tom Gray, who gave evidence right at the start, described it as a get-out-of-jail-free card for many. Why do you take that position? What are the impacts for the recording industry? And if you would just set out at the start what exactly Safe Harbour is. We know on the committee, but there are many people who watch this who might think it's something else altogether. But why do you take the position you do?
Well, Safe Harbour is essentially a legal protection that has been granted to internet companies where their users upload content. Essentially what it says is if the users upload content, then provided that you take it down if you receive a notice, if it's illegal, then you're not liable for that. And that's had two very important effects. The first is that certain services, as we've mentioned, use that in negotiations to say, I don't even need a license from you, Warner Music or independent label. I don't need a license from you. I'll pay you this much and you can be happy with that, because otherwise we'll operate without a license. And that changes fundamentally the existence of the safe harbor, changes the negotiation substantially. And that's why you see that huge differential in per stream rates between user uploaded content on YouTube, for example, and other streaming services. The second effect of the safe harbor is to protect pirates. Because if you're running an illegal pirate site and your users post content onto it, you can say, we're not liable for that, send us a notice, we'll take it down. It goes straight back up, you send them another notice, you take it down. The BPI has sent 1 billion notices to Google and Bing, removing content on behalf of the labels and artists whose work we're protecting. And it's ridiculous. I mean, how many billions will be enough? One is never really able to keep pace with the speed of piracy. And therefore, what is needed to address that? Firstly, we need to clarify the safe harbors and make clear that it should not protect them in those circumstances. And secondly, put proactive obligations on platforms to ensure the legal content doesn't appear on their service and will be taken down automatically by them. So notice and stay down obligations, know your business customer obligations that require them to get rid of bad actors on their services. And those two measures would make a great deal of difference. And in fact, the Competition and Markets Authority Digital Task Force just recommended that government do that and impose these proactive responsibilities on digital platforms. I think it'd be very helpful if more pressure were put on government to make that happen.
Yeah, well, that may well be something that we pick up in our recommendations. But I mean, given that you've got we've heard that 51% of the world's music and 8 of the most streamed videos on YouTube ever are music videos. It makes your point for you, doesn't it? So YouTube will tell us that they've paid out £12 billion to rights holders as of January last year, and will become the industry's main source of revenue in 5 years' time. How would you respond to that argument, Geoff?
Well, I would be thrilled if YouTube overtook Spotify and others in terms of how much they pay the music industry. We're not on a path to achieve that. Let's put it this way, because I think last year we received something like £35 million in the UK for all the tens of billions of views of music videos, which is largely on YouTube, which is about half what we earn from selling vinyl records. That can't be right. And to me, I don't really recognize the projections that YouTube has. Of course, they are trying to grow a subscription music service. And if they can grow YouTube Premium, their subscription tier, then that could generate a lot more money, and that would be a fantastic thing. The industry is waiting to see them do that successfully.
I mean, as you know, they're coming before us later on this afternoon. So, but you would be clear, you don't think they're on the trajectory to become the industry's main source of revenue in 5 years' time?
Well, look, the data so far doesn't suggest it to me. They may have business plans and investment plans and brilliant ideas that will help them to achieve that. I'd love to see it happen. They should be contributing a huge amount more to the creators of the content that drive their business.
Yeah. So you both, because obviously what we're trying to do out of this evidence is produce something that we can tangibly put into a report and recommendations to try and drive change. You both call on the government to include rights holders in the online safety bill, and the government has been clear that it's on. I mean, it's right to do so. Of course, the online harms legislation will only apply to individuals, not to corporations. Is there a way that you can see around that in terms of the recommendations that we can make, Geoff?
That's a great question. We do think that the online harms bill creates structures that could be very appropriate for dealing with these issues. So the idea that there would be a regulator that would establish codes of practice, that's exactly the type of measure which is required to deal with the economic harms that we're talking about here. But let's say those economic harms cause harms to individuals who are creators. And I'd just like to make that point. So the suggestion could be that a hook is put in the bill so that it could, at least at a later date, be extended to cover IP and economic harms. That would create then an incentive on the platforms to agree voluntary measures that would hopefully address these problems. But as I say, in parallel, there's the CMA Digital Task Force recommendations. Those might represent another route to achieve a very similar thing, which is to ensure that platforms have a proactive duty of care to prevent illegal content on their services and to sweep it regularly and ensure that once something's been notified, it never comes back up.
Thank you, and thank you for your clarity and concise answers. By the way, there are many who could learn from you. Just Roberto, I just wonder whether you would like to touch on the whole safe harbour issue, which you will be very familiar with. Anything you would like to add, just finally, and to what Mr. Taylor has said?
Just the word platform that has been used, I wouldn't call them a platform. They're a music service. 450 of the top 500 most viewed videos are music related. It is not fair, and as I said right at the beginning, I'm under the belief that it's why the $9.99 continues to exist with the streaming platforms that are referred to as being music services. We would like them to push their prices up, but they can't when YouTube is such a mammoth with an offering and almost a default for the consumer to go to. Even the 5-second ad you have to watch and click skip when you can is not much of an inconvenience. No. So, we really want the government to look hard at this, and we can provide as much evidence or whatever you like in addition to what I'm saying today.
Thanks very much, Chairman.
Thank you. So thanks for watching. The next video will be a continuation of this first session. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.